counsel for the defendant. Both sides ready to proceed.
Yes. Yes,
Okay, who will be your next witness, Ms. Vickers?
Dr. Hall.
All right. All right, let's return the jury.
All right, is there any entries?
May be seated. State recognized presence of the jury.
Yes, sir.
And does the defense?
Yes, sir.
All right, members of the jury, did you follow all of my previous instructions?
Yes, sir.
The defense may call the next witness.
Defense would call Dr. Ryan Hall.
Dr. Ryan Hall.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Hall. Could you state your full name for the record and spell your last name?
Ryan Challoner Winton Hall, last name's Hall.
And Dr. Hall, what is your profession?
I'm a psychiatrist,
And where is your practice currently located?
Lake Mary, Florida.
Do you focus in any particular specialized area?
I'm also board certified in forensic psychiatry, and I did an additional year of training up in Cleveland, Ohio on how to do forensic evaluations.
And how long have you worked as a psychiatrist?
I was board certified, I think, in 2008, so about 5 years.
Okay. And how long have
did
you...
4 years while in training while being supervised,
Okay.
so 9 years experience in total, 5 years on my own.
And how long have you been working in the field of forensic psychiatry?
For about the same period of time, 5 years.
Okay. And if you could walk us through what degrees you have.
I have a BA from Johns Hopkins in biology and psychology. I got my MD from Georgetown. I did a year of internal medicine at Johns Hopkins Sinai. I then did my residency at Johns Hopkins for 3 years in psychiatry, and then I did a 1-year fellowship, which is additional certification at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio.
And those are all accredited programs?
Yes, ma'am.
And were your internships, your various residencies, were they focused into forensic psychiatry or another field?
Most of the internal medicine was general internal medicine. The psychiatry, I did a 4-month elective at Clifton T. Perkins, which is a hospital for the criminally ill in Maryland. And then the forensic fellowship did have some treatment, but they were usually people who were on parole or probation who had already gone through the court system. So the fellowship was very specific for forensic issues. There was some forensics in the general psychiatry program.
And I take it you're licensed to practice in Florida.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you licensed in any other states?
Not currently. I did hold licenses in Maryland and Ohio, but since I'm not practicing there now, I've just let those licenses lapse.
And again, you've been licensed in Florida since when?
I believe 2008.
Okay.
Possibly 2007. I may have started the process before I finished.
Okay. And are you active in any professional organizations?
Yes, probably too many. I'm active in Florida Psych, FMA, Southern Psychiatric, where I'm president-elect. I'm active in APPLE, which is the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, where I serve as a councilman currently. I'm also a young physician representative from Apple to the AMA, which is the American Medical Association, and I'm also a member of the APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association.
And have you published any books or articles?
I've published some book chapters that vary in terms of content. Some of them are on somatization disorder, some of them are on terrorism, some of them are on immigration. I've published, I think, roughly 70 articles. Some of them deal more with clinical stuff, such as medications, serotonin syndrome, neuroleptic malignant syndrome. Some of them, again, focus on terrorism. Some of them focus on legal issues.
And are you currently serving on the editorial boards of any journals or
I've
magazines?
been asked to review for several journals, so if an article comes in, it's part of the peer review process where they'll send it out to people who've published or are known in the area and asked to comment on. I think I am on the editorial board for Clinical Geriatrics, which is a peer-reviewed paper.
Okay. And have you received any honors or awards?
Through a group called Psychosomatics, which is the Consultant Liaison branch of psychiatry, I received an award called the Dorfman for one of the papers I wrote. I also teach at a law school and wrote a law school review article, which was chosen by Reuters as one of the top 10 law reviews for the year.
And you've mentioned psychosomatic a number of times. What does psychosomatic mean in layman's terms?
That the mind affects the body. So the organization called Psychosomatics deals with the doctors who are in the hospitals who do what we call consultant liaisons. So if somebody's in due to a heart attack or due to a surgical issue, but they also have psychiatric concerns, they often call the consult liaison docs to help with medication management, prevent delirium, address any adjustment reactions they may be having to being sick or being in the hospital.
And besides forensic examinations, are there other examinations or evaluations that you might be asked to conduct?
I also have a general practice, so I do treat patients, see a lot of depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD in my office in Lake Mary. I do other types of forensic evaluations, such as competencies to like write a will or something of that nature. So not all my forensic work is criminal.
And the forensic work that you are preparing for court, are you hired by any particular parties?
It varies. Sometimes I may be appointed by the judge. Sometimes I may be approached by either the defense or the prosecution to see somebody.
Would you say that you have a higher percentage of who's hiring you than the other? Are you, say, more often working for a defense? Are you more often working for the courts?
You know, I forgot to check this morning to see what my percentage breakdown is. I think I'm probably about 60-40, and it varies from time to time. I've done prosecution work. I've done defense work.
60% on the side of?
It used to be prosecution, but I've done several defense cases recently, so it may be 60% defense, 40% prosecution now.
So it might vary year to year.
It might vary year to year.
And are you on the court-approved list of forensic examiners for the state of Florida?
Yes.
And when was the last time that you did the training for that list?
I think I did it roughly when I moved back down to Florida in about 2008.
And do you recall who teaches that course?
I think Dr. Randy Otto is the psychologist who runs it. There was also an individual out of Vanderbilt who was a lawyer who discussed some of the case law and things of that nature. His name I don't remember.
Okay. And would you be able to say how much of your time is devoted to forensic examination?
It varies, but probably about 30 to 40% of my time.
Okay. And how many times in the past, if you could estimate, how many times do you think you've evaluated someone for sanity at the time of the offense?
Probably about 50 to 100 times.
And have you previously been qualified as an expert in a court of law?
Yes, I've been qualified in state court as well as federal court.
And any states other than Florida?
I have done cases in other states where I've submitted reports. I've done some video depositions, meaning that they took a deposition, they heard my testimony. I didn't actually fly out. So I think I've been certified in Arizona, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
So the majority has been in Florida?
Majority's been in Florida, but I have done cases in Ohio, New Jersey, New York. Sometimes they settle or they do a plea bargain, and again, I don't necessarily testify in court, but I have done cases in other states and in other jurisdictions.
And how many times would you, if you had to estimate, how many times would you say that you've actually testified in a court of law?
About 25 to 50 times.
At this time, Your Honor, I would ask that Dr. Hall be allowed to testify as an expert in the field of forensic psychiatry.
What says the state? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Dr. Hall will be accepted as an expert witness in the area of forensic psychiatry. You may continue.
Thank you. And Dr. Hall, were you requested by the counsel for the defendant to examine Jason Rodriguez and determine what his sanity was on November 6th of 2009?
Yes, I was.
And were you paid by the defense to conduct an examination of Mr. Rodriguez and to write a report based on what you examined and what you saw for them?
Yes, I was.
And do you recall meeting Jason Rodriguez?
Yes.
Do you recall what date that was?
I've met Mr. Rodriguez 4 times. The first time, I believe, was December 24th, 2009. I think I saw him again in 2011, once again in 2012, and then I think the last time was in July 2013. And
do you see Mr. Rodriguez in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Could you point to him and identify an article of clothing that he's wearing?
It's that man sitting over there with the beard and I guess the dark white shirt or off-white shirt.
Would the record reflect that he's correctly identified Jason Rodriguez?
The record will so indicate.
And if we could, the last examination that you did of Mr. Rodriguez in July of this year, that examination was focused on Mr. Rodriguez's sanity. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall where that examination took place?
I believe it was at the North Florida Treatment Center, which is a psychiatric hospital outside of Gainesville.
And who was present for that examination?
I was. Mr. Rodriguez, I believe you were as well.
All right. And what items did you review in order to help determine if Mr. Rodriguez was sane at the time?
I had reviewed police reports that were provided, several witness statements that were provided, reviewed past hospital records, past times where he may have had run-ins with law enforcement officials. Also reviewed his treatment records at the facility. Just for context, I think I also may have reviewed some of his records when he was in the jail. If we need a more specific list, it's on my report. I can dig it out.
Would that refresh your recollection to refer to your report?
Probably would. So I've got medical records of Greater Orlando Psychiatric Associates.
And those medical records, was that something prior to the event in question or afterwards?
They were prior to the event in question. General recollection is I think it was around 2003, 2005-ish, and I believe some in 2007 as well.
Okay. And what other medical records?
Reviewed some reports done by other experts, such as Dr. Jeffrey Danziger, saw state's response demands of discovery, summary of police response, Gateway Center, records of the Orlando Police Department, including incident report, Florida Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles summary sheet on Mr. Beckford, case synopsis from District 9 Medical Exam Office, statements of Marina Day, statements of James Beverly, charging affidavit, Florida Highway Safety Motor Vehicle summary sheet of Jason Rodriguez, mug shot profile poster, criminal history summary, affidavit for search warrant, property receipt. Sorry, apologize. Florida Highway Safety and Motor Vehicle summary sheet for a number of individuals who I believe were probably in the building at the time. I don't know if it's worth going over each and every name. Statement of Kenneth Brockman, statement of Kevin Easterling, statement of Jonathan Cute, outlined by P. Bruning, FIU summary, incident report 82407, 82407 missing persons report, Incident report 06-2907, gun receipt, Interior Department memo of 09-11-2007, firearms report, incident report 09-1709, Florida Highway Safety and Motor Vehicle summary sheet on Stephen Rodriguez, surveillance video synopsis, Allied Barton Security Service daily journal and operating log, map of Gateway Center, firearms transition record, one over-the-counter for Stephen Rodriguez, firearms transition record, part one over-the-counter, Jason Rodriguez, Orange County Sheriff's Office property form, Orange County Sheriff's Office facsimile transmittal cover sheet, OrangeCountyFlorida.net incarceration sheet and Jason Rodriguez, competency evaluation report of Dr. Alan Burns, forensic psychology evaluation of Daniel Tesler, PsyD, psychology affiliation report of Jacqueline Olander, PhD, treatment records and report of North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center, email communications from Mr. Rodriguez to FBI and FCC, nursing progress notes from North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center, forensic competency evaluation of Jacqueline Olander, PhD, 104-2013, medical records from Orange County Correctional Health Service Department. I had a telephone conversation with Miss Anna Rodriguez, his mother, but that occurred after I had seen him. And then I had some previous reports that I had done when I'd seen him in December 24th, 2009 and December 28th, 2011.
Sounds like you reviewed a lot of documents.
Yes.
Including many documents from both witnesses to November 6th, victims of November 6th, police that responded November 6th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to review those before or after your evaluation in July, and maybe even before or after you ended up writing your report?
Most of those I had received before I had seen him. There was some additional things that kind of came in over the years. I think one piece that's not listed on there that I've reviewed since issuing the report was a statement by Rafael Vasquez. I've also seen some video footage since I did the report of statements made to the media and when he was being interrogated.
Okay. Was there anything that you specifically requested or wanted to look at that you feel you did not get a chance to see?
When I did an earlier report on him, he mentioned he'd been in the military, and at that time I thought it might be important to get military records. It was many years prior, but since I had a chance to see him multiple times over the years, I didn't feel it was as important to get military records.
Okay. And in your professional experience and opinion, being a doctor, not a lawyer, what do you understand the test for sanity to be in the state of Florida?
Florida uses a version of the Daubert test, which says that, first of all, somebody has to suffer from a mental illness or serious mental illness, and because of that mental illness, they either didn't know what they were doing or did not know that what they were doing was wrong. And that may be a little poorly paraphrased, but that's the general gist.
And did Jason Rodriguez suffer from a mental infirmity, disease, or defect on November 6, 2009, in your opinion?
Yes, in my opinion, he suffered from schizophrenia, probably paranoid schizophrenia.
And is there a particular way that people with paranoid schizophrenia would act? Something you would expect to see?
It can vary, and we're currently in the field of psychiatry going through a transition between what's known as DSM-4, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual 4, and DSM-5. So DSM-4, which was being used at the time the event occurred, kind of broke down schizophrenia into several types. So you had paranoid, you had catatonic, you had disorganized, you had residual. The new DSM-5 doesn't get as much into the subcategorization of it. So depending on the nature or flavor, for lack of a better word, of someone's schizophrenia, somebody could be very disorganized, kind of babbling in the street, incoherent. Other people may, on first glance, appear somewhat normal or appear somewhat odd, but are still hallucinating, having delusions that people are after to hurt them or get them. And usually people with paranoid schizophrenia tend to look a little more normal. They tend to have less of what we call the negative symptoms, which is kind of the flat affect and the withdrawal. They tend to have more of the delusions. They tend to have more auditory hallucinations.
And these various symptoms that they would tend to exhibit, is that something that tends to remain constant in someone's diagnosis, or do those symptoms change over time?
The symptoms can definitely change over time, and again, that's part of the reason why it was nice in this case that I could see him on 4 different times to kind of get a sense of what his course is. Some people will have what we call exacerbations, where due to whatever reason, external stressors, their symptoms get worse, or they could just get worse kind of out of the blue. Other people will always kind of have a chronic baseline level that really doesn't fluctuate much. So there can be some variation, and that's why it's good to be able to see someone over time to get a sense of what their particular characteristics are.
Now, you mentioned that symptoms may change, particularly with stressors. Would you consider being arrested a stressor?
Being arrested can be a stressor, yes.
Being charged with a crime would be a stressor?
Being charged with a crime could be a stressor, yes.
If someone were under stress, let me ask you this too, would being in and out of treatment, particularly on and off medications, would that potentially trigger paranoid schizophrenic symptoms?
And again, you kind of have to take it sometimes on a case-by-case basis. It's not uncommon for people with schizophrenia to have what we call poor insight. They don't necessarily think they're ill. They think that what's going on is real and is actually happening to them. Especially if there's kind of a paranoid tinge to it, they think people who are telling them that they're ill may be having ulterior reasons for doing that. So when you look at some of the larger studies, like I think it's called the CATIE trial, which tried to look at 5,000 schizophrenics over a long period of time, about 50% of them stopped their medications after about 9 months, and that's even if they were involved and enrolled in a study. So it's not uncommon for people to go on and off their medications, and stopping medications can sometimes result in an exacerbation.
Now, let's talk about that particularly in Mr. Rodriguez's case. You said that you had reviewed his medical history, particularly his mental health history, based on one counselor that he had seen, but that only went up to about 2008.
I believe 2008, 2007, somewhere in that range, that he had been seeing someone, that there had been issues with costs, that he had been cutting his meds in half to try and make them last longer. And unfortunately, a lot of these medications are expensive. So again, as a rough ballpark, Zyprexa is about $200 a month. Now, there are some older medicines that are generic that may be cheaper, but they have different side effects. And again, the side effects are often why people stop their medicines.
And did those records that you reviewed for this case, did they indicate, as you've said, Mr. Rodriguez was kind of on and off meds due to financial issues or trying to extend his medication, did those records indicate or seem to correlate that he would become better and worse as a result of going to his doctor or using his medications?
As a general broad statement, I would say yes. I mean, usually people do better when they're on medications, and that may also be because they're being seen, they've got a relationship, there may be other supports going on as well. At the time, though, again, I think Mr. Rodriguez had poor insight. There's several notes where he says these medicines aren't helping or I'm not doing well. There are other places where he said, yes, I do think the medicine is helping, if I can remember them correctly.
And did, in all of the various documentation you reviewed and people that you spoke with, including you said you, besides speaking with Mr. Rodriguez, you spoke with his mother, was he on any medication in all of 2009 from what you can see?
Best I can tell, probably not. When I talked with the mother, the general understanding I had is he had not been active in seeing someone, that there may have been some medicines in the house, but it wasn't clear if he was taking it. Kind of the last notes from the therapy kind of said that he felt that the medicines weren't helping him and that he didn't think he was ill or needed them.
And let's talk about the second part of the sanity definition. You had said it if we can break it down into the various issues, because of the paranoid schizophrenia, is it your opinion that Jason Rodriguez did or did not know what he was doing during the shooting on November 6th of 2009?
I don't think Mr. Rodriguez was a disorganized schizophrenic, so I think he had some understanding of what he was doing. When I was going through training, kind of the example they gave is if somebody has a gun and they think it's a banana, then that would show that they didn't know what they were doing. I think Mr. Rodriguez had an understanding of what a gun was, what it did. He said he had it for protection, that he was worried that people were out to harm him. So I do think he had an understanding of what a gun was. Where I think that he may meet criteria for the insanity defense is that he didn't know that what he was doing was wrong.
And besides knowing what he was actually doing, like you've indicated, you believe that he knew that he had a gun.
Yes.
Did he understand the consequences of using that gun?
My general impression is yes, he did. Now, unfortunately, I can't remember if I directly asked him if you pulled the trigger, what could happen, but Mr. Rodriguez was an individual who was a hunter, and again, if you didn't think that a gun could protect you, why would you carry it? So my general sense is that he did know what a gun was and what it could do.
And so you feel it's the kind of like a 2B, that even though he knew what he was doing, he knew its consequences, he didn't know on that day and time that it was wrong.
Correct. That he thought his use of the gun would have been considered lawful, for lack of a better word, due to his delusions that he thought he was under threat and was acting in a self-defense type manner.
If you could talk more about what specifically about his delusions leads you to that opinion.
What's nice about this case is we've got a long history of records. So, I mean, some of the records talk about his paranoia initially involving...
Exception?
That the doctor can speak about the records that he's referred to and coming to his opinion. He can speak to not particular detail of those records, but he can speak to the general content. Dr. Hall, you were...
Objection will be overruled. You may continue.
Sorry, thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Hall, you were indicating that you had reviewed prior medical records of the defendant. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would it refresh your recollection to see those medical records again?
It may. I've got some abstracts in my report. I don't know if that's a fair enough basis for refreshing my memory or if I would need to see the original documents.
I'd prefer to limit you to what's in evidence. May I approach?
You may.
I'm showing the witness what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 1. Do those appear to be nearly the same as the medical records that you reviewed previously?
Yes.
And was there anything in particular in those documents that lead you to your opinion that Jason Rodriguez, from that time, between 2003 to 2008, to the incident in the end of 2009, is there anything in particular in those records would lead you to your opinion that he would not know that what he was doing was wrong?
They help confirm the diagnosis of schizophrenia. When he was first seen, there was some question if this may have been major depressive disorder, or again, why it's sometimes important to see somebody over a period of time, because first impressions may not always be correct. But as he was going through treatment, it became more clear that he was having paranoid thoughts, psychosis, that they were at times general, that he was worried about the neighborhood he was living in, worried that people could break into him. But you also started to see it evolve and take on more shape. So initially he was worried that people were against him because of his ex-wife or his ex-wife's family, and then it kind of keeps changing and morphing. So when he says, you know, in 2007 I started to be concerned that I was brain hacked or zapped, you can kind of see this progressive morphing of the delusions over a period of years.
Now, you said that you could see his delusions, his fears morphing and changing. That sounds like someone just making stuff up. Why would you believe that what he's describing as his delusions, particularly what he was saying was happening with him in 2009, why would you believe that this is real to him?
Part of it is kind of the feel. You know, we have a term called gestalt, which means the overarching things. And when you talk with people, sometimes little things can change with time. One of the things that I've noticed when I talked with him before times is he always reported the auditory hallucinations to be similar, which in my mind led some credibility that he probably was actually experiencing them, that he would hear them mostly on his right side, that it would usually be one voice, occasionally he could hear multiple, that, you know, he initially said I heard them all the time, but would then clarify, well, there would be times where he wouldn't talk. So, you know, again, the way he described it seemed consistent with other people I've seen who've had schizophrenia and had these kind of symptoms. The fact that he's reporting chronic paranoid delusions beginning possibly as early as 2003 suggests that this is a chronic condition that's stable, that he wasn't making up a week before the event occurred.
And you've said several times you'd seen him 4 times. Did you feel, especially by the last time you saw him in July, did you feel that he trusted you, that he was giving you honest answers?
No, I'm going to object to...
Sustain.
You also talked about that he consistently reported the voice coming from his right side. Did he report any other symptoms related to the voice, or did he explain to you if he had any ideas of how that voice came to be?
He had a delusion that somebody was monitoring the frequency of his vocal cords. And at times there was, again, some fluctuation in what he was reporting. So once he said there's nothing implanted because they can read it. Later, after he'd been on medications longer, it had changed a little bit. Whether that was due to the medication or the progression of time is hard to say. And said, no, there is something implanted in my right ear. At times he seemed to put a little more significance on factors that were occurring. So a record from 2007 notes frequent headaches. First few times I saw him, the headaches weren't a prominent part of his presentation. Last time I saw him, he was saying, no, I've got this pain on my right side. So again, was that something new that was being incorporated in, or was that a chronic problem? At times can be hard to tell. But the overall pattern of the symptoms he gave were generally consistent for schizophrenia, had, and again, this is a hard thing to quantitate, had enough fluctuation that it didn't seem rehearsed, but also wasn't so divergent that you thought he was forgetting what he told you the last time or was trying to remember a story he had told you the last time.
And if we could talk about your questioning of him as to what happened on November 6th itself. You said that you'd had an opportunity to speak with his mother. Was that before or after your report on his sanity?
It was after I had seen him, but before I had issued the final report.
Did speaking with his mother, well, let me ask, before you spoke with his mother, had you formed an opinion as to whether he was sane or not?
For the most part, yes. And again, this is one of those areas that's sometimes hard to answer. I had seen him. I was under the general impression that he was schizophrenic, that he did have paranoid delusions, that those delusions probably did not allow him to appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. Speaking with the mother, whenever you get new information, it may change your opinion. But what she said kind of collaborated what he had said previously, that he hadn't been doing well, that he'd been engaging in paranoid behavior, that when she walked in front of windows, he'd push her down because he was worried somebody could shoot into the house, that he carried the gun with him every time he went out because he was worried, that he kept the gun under his pillow in his house because he was worried. So again, the mother's statements when I spoke with her on the phone kind of collaborated the symptoms he reported having. And there was a couple of incidences which he initially stated, I pulled the gun on my mother in the middle of the night, which she also said happened. And she brought it up on her own, not with me asking, did this happen? So I thought talking with the mother helped to collaborate what he said. And there weren't huge disparities in terms of how he was functioning in general.
And did Mr. Rodriguez indicate to you that he remembered going to the offices of RS&H?
Yes. Mr. Rodriguez said, and I'll back up a little bit, that he woke up that morning, that he had errands he needed to run, that he went to the registrar's office at the campus he had been trying to get an MBA from, that he went to the post office, and then he went to the office of RS&H.
Did you ask him specifically about carrying the gun to the school or to the post office?
I asked him specifically about the school. I may not have asked him specifically at the post office. He said that he left the gun in the car when he went to the school because he knew it was against the law to carry a gun onto school property.
But that doesn't make you think that if he knew right from wrong about whether you can carry a gun at the school, shouldn't he know right from wrong about using a gun to shoot people where he used to work?
Well, there's a lot of things that may indicate. Sometimes when people are delusional, they may think they're above the law. So if somebody thought they were the son of God, or that they were the president, or that the president was going to give them a pardon, they may think that what they're doing was right or not wrong. His delusions weren't of that nature. So again, his delusions were that people were after him and that he understood that the law still existed. So when it was a situation, he tried to follow it. He doesn't have any past arrest history. When you look at his criminal record, he doesn't have a history of bar fights or getting into trouble of that nature. So I thought he was trying to follow the law on that day, and if he did leave the gun in his car, that would suggest that he knew what the law was trying to follow it, and wasn't having delusions that he was above the law or the law somehow didn't apply to him or that the law didn't matter.
So in your opinion, is there a point at which entering the office with the gun where he felt it was lawful to carry, and the point of shooting someone with the gun to the point that it could kill somebody? What changed in his mind between those?
And this is a tricky area for me because he reports having a memory up until when he walked through the door. And it's not uncommon for people who are accused of murder to have gaps in their memory. About 50% of people, roughly, report that when you look at the literature on this. So I don't know what exactly he was thinking at that moment in time, and he can't tell me because he says he doesn't remember. What we've got, though, is we've got a history of an individual with paranoid delusions. We've got a history of an individual who, per the reports of his mother, was doing worse within closer proximity of the time. We got a history of somebody who was not on his medications. We got a history of somebody who at least told me he wasn't drinking at the time that this occurred, that was fearful for his life and that people were harming him, that came into a situation where he felt justified to shoot, even though he had been following the laws earlier in that day. So it's going to be up to the jury to decide if he really knew right or wrong or where it goes, but his behavior prior to that suggests he was following the law.
And at what point, based upon both documentation and your interview with Mr. Rodriguez, at what point does he then begin to remember what he was doing on November 6th?
When I saw him, I kind of asked, what was the last thing you remembered? Do you remember anything else? So I did try and follow up, but if somebody has a true memory block, they don't remember. The next question I asked is, what was the next thing you do remember? And he said, I remembered stopping to get gas. And then I drove home from the gas station. I asked him, do you remember how you were driving? To the best of his recollection, he wasn't speeding. He wasn't running red lights. He went home. He parked. He went into his house. He told me he started cooking dinner. His mother stated that when he came home, he seemed like he was in a bit of a trance and made some comment of, I'm in a different zone. She left the house. Police arrived, and that's when he was apprehended. Did he ever relay to you that the police were part of his delusion, that they were part of the conspiracy against him? Yes. He reported that he was worried that Tallahassee was involved, that the local police department was involved, and that's why he had contacted the FBI and the FCC to try and find out who was monitoring his frequency and who was talking to him through this frequency. So he was worried about the local law enforcement being involved, but prior to that day, he had tried to get help and actually, from what I understand, called 2 different FBI offices looking for help in an investigation. So again, I took that as actions as somebody who was feeling threatened, trying to follow the law, and trying not to do anything that was illegal. And do you have an opinion as to the events surrounding his arrest? Per his statement, per the mother's statement, and again, memories may not be 100% 4 years down the road, is that he didn't change clothes, he didn't take a shower, he didn't try and shave, he wasn't packing a bag, he wasn't trying to flee. So again, in terms of what he knew, what happened, the police report is a little vague. I think they make the statement that they came, they saw him in the window, they instructed him to come out. How they instructed him, I don't know. I don't know if they did verbal communications. I don't know if they gestured. But at some point, he came out of the house. They did not need to storm the building, and they put him in cuffs and took him away. There was no gunfight. There was no fighting. There was no problems in terms of when the police came to apprehend him. And again, his delusion is that the police were involved, that they were engaged in illegal activity. His delusion was not that the police weren't an authority, though. So did that surprise you, that he wouldn't have attempted to fight back against the police? It's hard to say. If he thought it was an insurmountable force, many people, even if he did think that they were a danger, may have chosen not to fight. The fact that they were included in his delusion does fit in with him contacting federal authorities and not local authorities. And were you able to review statements that he, in the words of the police, spontaneously uttered at the time that he was actually being taken into the police station? Yes. There was a couple of statements that he's reported to have made. One officer said, I'm having a bad day. Another officer said, I'm going through a tough time. I'm sorry. And it may be a slight paraphrase I could refer to refresh. But there was a little variation in the words on whether or not he said, I'm sorry or not. He also made a statement of, this will work out in the end, or something to that effect. When he was going into the station, some reporters were kind of putting a microphone in front of his face, and he made some statement about they know what they did, which again would be consistent with paranoid delusion that people had been trying to harm him and they knew it. And again, he believes that everything he says somebody hears and knows. And then there was the statement, they left me to rot. And when I talked to him, especially in 2009, he said that the brain hacking was causing brain damage, so that there was actual physical damage that it was doing to him. So that may have been part of they left me to rot.
Did he indicate to you at any time that he was going to RS&H to go after particular people?
No, he said he was going to RS&H because there was a problem with his unemployment check, and he thought that they had done something with the numbers or with the reason why he hadn't received his check. So that's why he said he was going there that day.
Did he ever indicate to you that he had a particular intent to harm or go after Otis Beckford?
No, he didn't indicate any particular problem with Otis Beckford. He actually talked more about Rafael Vasquez as part of his delusion. This was somebody he had worked with previously at the Turnpike. He thinks Rafael was Hal Sharptooth, which is the voice he hears, got his frequency. Rafael also worked at the firm. But, you know, when I talked with him, his anger was directed at anger may be strong. His delusion believed somebody was involved, somebody who had done this was Rafael Vasquez, not Otis Beckford.
Did he actually find Rafael Velasquez or Vasquez that day?
From what I've read in the statements and the police reports, no.
And so
the other thing which may be important or may not be important on that day as well, I'm sorry to go back, but if he had been planning to do this when he left the house that morning, then why go to the school to try and re-enroll? I mean, that's the behavior somebody does when they're future-oriented and hoping to have a next day. So if he was planning to go to a shooting, you usually don't see people trying to enroll in a year-and-a-half program. So again, that's something, it's not the begin-all, end-all, but that's something else to take into account on how his day went and whether or not he was planning to engage in this type of behavior. He had the gun, but he always had the gun with him. He didn't load it with special bullets like hollow points. He didn't have on tactical equipment like knee pads or things like that. So, you know, during his account, what the mother says, there doesn't seem to have been external planning prior to that day to go do this.
And would you say of all of the various things you relied on to form your opinion, interviews, videotaped evidence, written documents, do they weigh equally to you? Is there anything that weighs more heavily into your opinion?
In part due to his amnesia, the documents of things that occurred prior to the event, I do give a little more weight to, just because it's contemporaneous, it's before this occurred. You know, sometimes after an event like this happens, people's memories can change, either intentionally or unintentionally, especially over long periods of time when people have been on medications or have been asked to retell the same story again and again and again. Memories can become fuzzy. So the accounts at the time and the accounts a little bit before in terms of his illness behavior, I thought was a little more important in terms of credibility and gave a little more weight to.
And what about...
But again, it's the ultimate overall picture that's the opinion's based on.
You talked about things that led up to that day, particularly close in time to the event itself. What about immediately after the event, the reports of his arrest? And did you get a chance to look at the video of him waiting for an interview in the police station?
I did get a chance to look at the video. It was after I did the initial report, though. I had read the transcript from the interview talking with him before I had issued the report. Looking at the video, though, what I thought was interesting is, again, he wasn't talking much, he wasn't pacing much, he was very still.
Is that something that's common with schizophrenics? Is that something that's unusual?
Again, there's different flavors of schizophrenia. He did not seem to be somebody who was out of control. He seemed as if this was somebody who thought he was being watched, and he was sitting there and he wasn't saying much, and, I thought it spoke possibly towards his delusional state. Now, again, some of that is speculation on my part. So.
And based on all of those things, again, in your professional opinion, was Jason Rodriguez sane on the morning of November 6, 2009?
No. By a legal definition, I don't think he was sane.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Dr. Hall, let me just start by following up with that last point that you made, that Jason Rodriguez was not, in your words, sane by the legal definition on the morning of November 6th of 2009. At what point? When he walked into the building? When he got into the elevator? When he started shooting? What point?
Well, again, the notion of insanity is that they've committed a crime. So, again, legally, medical definitions are different than legal definitions. So do I think he was mentally ill the entire day? Sure. What we're asked, though, to weigh right here now is the actual shooting event. So, do I think he was insane at the time he was firing and pulling the trigger? Yes.
All right. Except that the question that has to be answered is whether or not he had an understanding that there are certain things that are against the law or against societal standards, correct?
That he knew what he was doing was wrong.
Against the law. That he knew what he was doing was against the law, or knew what he was doing was wrong.
Wrong. Wrong is the way the statute is written. Does he know what he's doing was wrong? It doesn't say against the law. It says wrong.
Did he know, well, things that are against the law are also things that are wrong, correct?
Sometimes.
Okay. Shooting people was something that he would have understood was wrong.
Depends on the context you put shooting people. Committing murder, I think he would have thought was wrong. Acting in what he thought was self-defense, he may have thought was legally justified.
All right. You're talking about justification for a crime, not an excuse for a crime.
Well,
correct?
I'm talking about the law, and there is a law of self-defense. So again, did he think he was acting in self-defense? Possibly.
Well, you just told the jury that your answer to that question is speculative because he can't tell you what he was thinking or doing at the time that the crime was committed, correct?
Correct. He told me he can't remember what he was thinking when he pulled the trigger. And if he can't remember it, I can't ask him. What I have, though, is I have the history of him having paranoid schizophrenia. I have the history of him acting on paranoid delusions. We have a history of him still having some of these symptoms afterwards and needing treatment. So again, the whole gestalt. Now, I've been very straightforward, though. I don't know what he was thinking on that exact moment in time.
Okay. So in order to try to compensate for that, what you would ordinarily do is to try to rebuild the picture of what he was doing or how he was acting in order to evaluate what he was thinking, correct?
As best as possible, that's what you try and do.
All right.
You look at behaviors, you look at statements. From the police statements I read, the witness statements I read, no utterances were made. So can't tell if he was in there shooting, saying, I'm going to get those SOBs, or if he was in there saying, don't hurt me. I don't know what he was saying because he didn't say anything. I don't know what he was thinking at that moment in time. That's up for the jury.
Okay. So what happened inside RSNH?
I wasn't there. Excuse me. So I'm just going off of what was in the witness statements and the reports, is that he opened the door, came in, reached in his shirt, pulled out a gun, and fired.
And then what?
Well, again, the witness statements, a lot of people didn't even see the shooter. A lot of people said that there were multiple shots. I've never heard anybody say they counted the shots or how many shots. I think there may have been shell casings found, but that he came in, walked. I've never even heard anybody put a time frame on exactly how long the shooting was going on for. So I don't know 100% what happened in there. I wasn't there, and the statements I'm going off of are at times confused.
Okay. Well, at the time that you gave a deposition, when? On October 8th, which was a little more than a month ago,
Yes, ma'am.
you had told me that the only things that you had looked at in order to try to determine how he was acting at RSNH were paper statements, correct?
At that time, that was all I had looked at. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what I take from your statement is that since we talked, you went back and reviewed additional items, correct?
Since we talked, additional items were sent to me. Yes, ma'am.
All right. And in the last month, you have not revealed to me in any way, shape, or form that you did additional work on this case. Am I correct?
No, ma'am. I haven't had any contact with your office. I don't think you asked me to contact your office if additional work was done either, though.
Okay. So among the things that you did after we talked was what? Listen to some statements?
I said earlier on that I had received an additional statement from Rafael Vasquez. Again, that was paper.
Velasquez.
Thank you. That was paper. I had seen the video of his jail interview.
Who's his?
Mr. Rodriguez. And I had received the video camera footage
Of what?
of the Gateway Center.
All right. So what time did he arrive?
I believe it was around 11:39, give or take.
And then what? Where did he go?
Well, I've never been to the Gateway Center, so I don't know how that parking garage works, and the camera cut from different cameras, so it's not a clear linear progression. But he came in, he went and looked at the bulletin board, which is what he told me he did when I interviewed him. He then went to the elevator. They didn't have cameras on the floor. They didn't have cameras in the office. And then he came out and left. I think the last part of the video was about 11:44, give or take.
All right. So you have no understanding of the time he spent in the parking garage at that structure?
No, I don't know how long he was in the parking garage or not. There were some shots on the video that showed him entering the parking garage. How long he was there, I don't know.
All right. And since you looked at this item, not only after I spoke to you, but after you last spoke to him, you didn't have an opportunity to ask him questions such as, what were you doing in the parking garage for 6.5 minutes?
No, ma'am, I didn't.
Okay. Or what were
and
you...
the video I saw didn't change my previous stated opinion.
I get that. But again, you didn't even seize upon any opportunity to try to ask him what he was thinking while he's in the parking garage for 6.5 minutes, correct?
I'm not sure if he was in the parking garage for 6.5 minutes or not, so I'll have to take your word on that.
Okay. Well, because you didn't make note of it when you watched the video.
No, I did not have a piece of paper and a stopwatch and count exactly how long he was in each of the 7 camera angles they showed, or 8, or how many camera angles it was.
But there is a clock on that, correct? If you wanted that information, if that was something that you considered important, you would have documented it and then perhaps gone and asked him about it, because what he says is that he doesn't remember what happened once he got off the elevator, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that the shooting happened immediately upon his getting off of the elevator.
That he got off the elevator, walked into the hall, opened the door, and opening the door was the last memory he had.
Okay. So that would indicate that anything that happened prior to that, he does have a memory of, correct?
Yes. And again, what he said is, I parked, I walked in. I don't know how long he was in the parking garage. And again, if you say it was 6 minutes, I'll take your word for that. When I watched the video, I didn't get the impression that he was in the parking garage for an exorbitant amount of time, but again, I didn't time it. He said he walked in, looked on the bulletin board. The video shows him walking in, looking to see what the floor number was. and then going towards the elevators.
All right.
So again, I thought the video camera that they showed corroborated what he said. Now again,
Corroborate?
how long? Thank you. Been up here for a little while and no water, so getting a little parched. But I didn't perceive him as being in the parking garage for a particularly long period of time.
Okay. But then again, since you didn't have that information, you didn't have an opportunity to ask him what he was thinking or doing in that parking garage. Yes or no?
No, I didn't ask him about the parking garage. I asked him previously, though, when I saw him, what do you remember? What were you thinking? What did you do?
Sure.
He did talk about coming in. He talked about looking on the bulletin board. That's shown in the video. So the account he gave me prior to him losing memory seemed to be consistent with what was in the video.
Who's Lori Ross?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the name?
Lori Ross.
I'm not familiar with the name now.
Okay. Do you have any idea if there was anyone who saw him in the parking garage?
There were some statements in the police report saying that some people saw him.
When?
My general recollection is they saw him after the parking garage, that somebody was trying to write down the number of his license plate when he was driving away.
Okay. How about in the parking garage before the shooting? Are you aware that anyone would have seen him at that point in time?
I may have read the police report. I don't remember paying.
You may. Objection overruled. You may continue.
Dr. Hall, the perceived threat that Mr. Rodriguez reported to you, that there was constantly, his life was constantly in danger, that existed beginning in 2005, correct?
Yes and no. Again, he's had paranoid delusions. That
Okay,
it's been
so
documented
yes.
from, well, I'm trying to answer your question.
I'm asking you
Counselor.
if it began in 2005. Did it?
His paranoid delusions began in 2005, that he expressed concerns over being harmed. Now, whether they chronic all the way through is hard to say. At certain points in time, he was in treatment. At certain points in time, he had been in the hospital. He even stated in the hospital at times he felt threatened. So again, the threats have been there over a long period of time. There may be some waxing and waning, though, in severity of it.
All right. And what your testimony is that even the week prior, he is telling you that these threats exist. They exist on October 31st, November 1st, November 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and into the 6th. Am I correct?
Yes, what he said is that the week prior to the event that he was hearing Sharptooth more frequently. The last time I saw him was the first time he ever described exactly what Sharptooth was saying. And again, I think that's probably due to the medications he's been on for a period of time. that Sharptooth was saying, I'm an axe murderer, I'm going to come and get you, you're going to die, things to that effect. He also stated that he was suicidal during that week, that he was worried that it was either going to be him or Sharptooth, that he had put the gun in his own mouth several times. So he describes the week prior not being in a good mental state.
All right, so he didn't go to RSNH on the 31st of October, correct?
No, he did not.
Or the 1st of November,
No,
or the 2nd,
no,
3rd,
no,
4th,
no,
5th,
no,
okay? There was a triggering event
possibly.
on the 6th.
It's hard
Correct.
to say why somebody does something on one date versus the other.
What happened on the 6th that was different than the 5th and the 4th and the 3rd and the 1st?
To be honest, I can't answer that because I know he went out. I know he went to the post office. I know he went to his college. I know he was expecting to see an unemployment check. Was that the triggering event, though? I can't say that one way or the other. When he was interviewed by the police later, they said, you were expecting the check today? And he said, yeah, either today, tomorrow, or Monday. So again, the fact that it wasn't there that one day, was that the straw that broke the camel's back? Or would Monday the next week have been the better proof that that was the straw? I don't know.
Okay, except that you asked Mr. Rodriguez why he went to RSNH that day, and his response had nothing to do with his delusions or his hallucinations, and had everything to do with the fact that he hadn't received that check, correct?
Well, let me rephrase that. That brings up a good point. When you say triggering event, I was putting more of a negative connotation on it. He said the reason he went to RSNH that day was because the check wasn't there and he thought they had somehow interfered with his check. So in terms of why he was at RSNH that day, that's reasonable. Whether or not that has anything to do with why there was a shooting that day, that I don't know.
Okay. But he did not mention to you at any point that he went there to try to resolve the issues with the brain hacking, correct?
No, he said the reason he went there was to get his unemployment addressed.
All right, so just to summarize, he wakes up that day, at some point points a gun at his mother, supposedly.
I believe it was the same day that this happened that he misidentified his mother in the middle of the night when she went to use the restroom.
Right, and apologized to her, establishing a clear recognition that he knew that that was wrong, to do that to his mother.
Right, that once he realized it was his mother and not a threat, that it was wrong to point a gun at your mother, yes.
All right. Then he goes to the school. He's carrying a firearm that he is lawfully carrying, and carrying it in a lawful way because he's trying not to violate the law, correct?
That's what he said, is that he left the gun in the car because he knows you're not supposed to have a gun on school property.
Okay, because that would be wrong.
That would violate the law, yes.
Okay. He then went to the post office and did the same thing. Have you learned that he left the gun in the car?
I don't think I directly asked him, and he didn't reveal whether he left it in the car or not, so I don't know if he had the gun on him at the post office or not.
All right. But if you were to learn that he did leave it in the car because he knew that it was wrong to carry it in there, it would be illegal, then that would also suggest, would it not, that he knew the difference between right and wrong at that point?
Well, and again, it's how you put it right and wrong. He knew what the law was. He was trying to follow the law. His delusion wasn't that he was above the law or that the law didn't apply to him. The question is the actual shooting, did he know it was wrong, or did he feel he was within the law when he did it?
No. The issue is not whether or not he felt he was within the law. The issue is, did he know it was wrong? Not whether or not it was justified, which is a self-defense concept, but did he know, would he have known that shooting people in a circumstance other than self-defense was wrong?
I believe he would have, that if he didn't think he was threatened and he just went out and robbed somebody or just killed a stranger on the street for no reason, I think he would have known that was wrong.
Okay. He would have known that at 11 o'clock that morning on the 6th?
Probably.
11:30?
Probably.
Noon?
Probably.
12:30?
Yes.
Okay. at all points in time that day were he to shoot people other than people who were complete strangers to him at RSNH, he would have known that was wrong.
Again, and I want to be careful how you're phrasing it, I don't know if he recognized people at RSNH. I don't know if he shot people he knew at RSNH or if he shot total strangers. I don't know if he saw everybody as a threat, if he thought they were going to pull out guns and shoot him first if he didn't respond. I don't know because he reports no memory of it. What I can say, though, is, again, paranoid schizophrenic, clear paranoid delusions for years, was having what appears to be exacerbations closer to the period of the time, had pulled the gun on his own mother and almost shot her because he thought she was a threat. So again, did he feel threatened at the time? I think there's a high likelihood that he did.
All right, you're not answering my question.
I apologize. I thought I was.
If he were to shoot anyone other than the people at RSNH, it is your opinion that he would have known that was wrong.
My opinion is that he...
Cases of objection.
Oh, sorry.
Calling for speculation that's outside the scenario that we're asking the doctor to testify to.
He's been telling us he's been...
Objection overruled. You may continue.
You can
I'm
finish
sorry,
your
could you
answer.
repeat the question?
Can we have the question read back, Your Honor?
Madam Court report.
If he were to shoot anyone other than the people at RSNH, it is your opinion that he would have known that was wrong?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he understood what the law was, and I think if he had gone out and committed murder or just shot random people for no reason, he would have recognized that as wrong.
Despite the paranoid schizophrenia and the exacerbation of symptoms.
Sure, because, again, delusions can be very specific. So you can be delusional that the CIA is after you, and unless somebody asks you about it or draws it out from you, you may never know that that's what somebody's thinking. And again, his delusions were very unique, that somebody was stalking him, that Tallahassee was involved, that the local police were involved, which in part is why he went to the FBI and the FCC to try and get help and not the local police. So if he was out on the street and shot somebody who was totally unrelated to his delusion, would he have known that was wrong? Sure.
Otis Beckford related to the delusion?
I don't know.
Guy Lugenbill related to the delusion?
I'm sorry, who?
You don't know Guy Lugenbill?
I don't know Guy Lukenbill. No, ma'am.
Pharaoh Hickson?
I don't know, ma'am.
John Hornbeck?
I don't know, ma'am.
Any of those people related to the delusion?
I don't know if they were or they weren't because, again, he reports no memory at the time. So I can't say if they were. I know that he had delusions that he was being brain hacked. He had delusions that people at RSNH were involved in it. Whether or not he perceived them as a threat at that moment in time, I can't answer because he doesn't remember.
I don't have any question, John.
Can you redirect?
Doctor, in your discussion of Mr. Rodriguez's delusions, were the company of RSNH and his bosses at RSNH part of the delusion that he felt was part of the conspiracy against him?
Yes, and this is where it gets a little tricky. When I saw him in 2009, he talked about he knew RSNH was involved and he thought 10 people were involved, but he didn't want to give names. Again, he was worried that anything he said was being overheard, that the jailers were involved. So he would talk about the delusion in a very broad sense, but he would never tell me what Sharptooth was saying. He never got into specifics. The only name he ever gave me was Rafael Vasquez. So he never said it was my boss. Now, he said I was fired for no reason. They made it look like incompetence. But he never gave names of people in particular that he was upset with, except for Rafael.
And he thought that that firing by his employers at RSNH was part of this whole ongoing conspiracy. That's his delusion.
Yes, and he thought that the other employees at RSNH were targeting him, harassing him. He made some comment that he had received an email or something that had penises drawn on his forehead that had apparently come from the other coworkers, but it had come through shredded, that he was receiving messages from the television and that the radio frequencies were blotting things out. So again, there were other psychotic symptoms that were going on that he felt that he was being targeted and that other people in the office were involved in the targeting, but he never said it was James Beverly who was behind it. The only name he ever gave was Rafael Vasquez.
And Rafael Velazquez also worked at RSNH at the time of the shooting.
Yes, and Mr. Vasquez had known Mr. Rodriguez previously when they worked at the Turnpike. Mr. Vasquez is apparently a ham radio operator, and in Mr. Rodriguez's mind, he was the one that, quote-unquote, hacked the frequency or gave the frequency to Sharptooth, and that's how Sharptooth was able to know what he was thinking. And again, it would be more from what he spoke. So it wasn't that he was directly reading his mind, but he could almost tell before the vocal cords even vibrated what was going to be said. And that was also how he was putting the thoughts into his head, or the voices into his head, was through knowing this frequency based off of ham radio, based off of Rafael Vasquez.
No one object to the narrative.
Sustained.
No further questions.
Any recross?
Just very briefly, Dr. Hall,
Yes, ma'am.
you know Rafael Velazquez was up in RSNH at the time of the shooting, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you know that Mr. Rodriguez didn't come into contact with him, correct?
My understanding, and again, this is from reading the statement of Mr. Vasquez, is that he hid behind a filing cabinet and wasn't easily visible,
Okay.
and that
and-
he thought the shooter had walked by, but
And that, right, Mr. Rodriguez walked by him and didn't go into the cubicle looking for him?
I don't know if he went into the cubicle looking for him or not, and Mr. Vasquez was behind a filing cabinet and couldn't see.
And you never,
he never
and you
saw the
never
shooter.
took the opportunity to try to talk to Mr. Velazquez about his experiences inside that office when the shooting took place, correct?
No, ma'am, I haven't had a chance to talk with Mr. Velazquez.
You haven't had a chance, or you didn't take the opportunity?
No opportunity was given.
No other questions?
May the doctor be excused.
He may.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. You may be excused. Okay, members of the jury, time is now approximately 1 minute past the hour of noon. We're going to recess for lunch. I'm going to ask that you return back here at 1:25 so we can start at 1:30. Please remember all of my previous instructions and the additional instructions on behalf of the state or the defense.
No, no.
No, Your Honor.
Okay, members of the jury, you may be excused for lunch.
Jury exiting.
Okay, you may be seated. Will the attorneys approach, please?